Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with two very special guests. Our special guests today are Rob and Trish MacGregor, and they're here to share with us their new book, Phenomena, Harnessing Your Psychic Powers. Now, Trish is the author of dozens of novels and nonfiction books, and she co-authored the Sidney Omar series of astrology books with her husband, Rob. Trish also teaches workshops on astrology and tarot. Now, Rob is a New York Times best-selling author of 20 novels and 18 nonfiction books in the New Age field. His novel, The Prophecy Rock, won the Edgar Allan Poe Award for Mystery Writing. He has worked with George Lucas, Peter Benchley, and Billy D. Williams, and has been the subject of many articles. So let's welcome to the show, Rob and Trish MacGregor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
You know, what an honor it is to have both of you on the show. My goodness, I love your books. I love following your posts about what you're up to. And as soon as I heard about this, I was like, oh my gosh, we have to talk.
Nigel's right here panting. So.
You know, doggies weighing in. Well, and so why don't you share with us, like, what inspired you to write this book?
Probably we had a lot of different stories and anecdotes and research that didn't just fit strictly into a synchronicity book.
And a lot of this research comes through our blog posts. We put a blog post about every other day, and people respond and start telling us their stories. And so we just gather these over the weeks, the months, the years, and so categorizing them and just seemed like something interesting to look at the phenomena itself, the paranormal. Not any one particular thing, telepathy, remote viewing, or whatever.
Well, I know you start off your book with a story that was personal to you.
What happened is I was sitting at my desk kind of in a half-wake state, just resting, and suddenly I see Rosemary, Trish's mother, and she seems very alert and awake, and just is right there and is waving goodbye to me. And off she goes. And then
less than probably 2 minutes later, I get a phone call from the nursing home where she was saying that she had just passed. And she was about to be put into hospice. So I suspected at the soul level, she just did not want to go to hospice. You know, she was just done.
Yeah. So she was probably already out of her body at that point when she contacted me. Maybe she had died completely. I had a similar experience with a cousin of mine who I wasn't that close to him, but I knew that he had brain cancer. He was, in the hospital, and my sister let me know that he had died. But before she told me that, I had a similar waking vision of him that he was suddenly there and he looked very healthy, which surprised me. And he just smiles brightly and says, "What's happening?" And then he just vanishes. And it was like a day or two later, I heard from my sister that he had died. So I didn't even know that was a true vision at the time. But,
our joke is that he sees people as they're dying. I mean, it's not a joke. It's just seems to be what he's able to do.
That's pretty interesting. A lot of people, I'm sure, have these experiences. I've had one, and either it's really comforting and you know what it is, or maybe some people are feeling like they may need a padded room, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's part of the problem. That's also one of the reasons we wrote this book. You know, a lot of people experience these things, but don't have anybody to talk to about it. You know, if they talk to say if you're younger and you talk to your parents about it, you're told, oh, it's just a vivid dream. You know, so we're just trying to show that everybody has these experiences to one degree or another.
And a lot of people hear voices, but it depends on where they're coming from to determine how they react. Some people hear voices, that are very negative experiences, and these are not good experiences. And there's others that find them to be very guiding in their life. Many mediums, for example. So there's an organization we write about that for people who have these experiences get together. It's called the Hearing Voices Network, and it's an international organization. I think 20 countries or so, and so they try to look at it in a very neutral way rather than the traditional mainstream medicine way was there's something wrong with you if you're hearing voices. Yeah. So they look at it as possibly positive, and some people need help.
Well, there's such a range there where basically before it was just, if you're hearing voices, you need help. And now they're looking at it, and that's why I thought your book, both of you, I mean, the books that you write and in the work you're involved in really help people to kind of discern, hey, is what I'm seeing a psychic phenomena, or is this actually something that, that is maybe different? Right.
Well, there's a town in Central Florida, just north of Orlando, called Casadega. And there, everybody hears voices because it's a town of psychic mediums.
It's a spiritualist community. And we have a friend who lives there. We've known her like 30 years. Since Trish and I first met, we started going up there from time to time and just seeing Hazel. And she gave me a reading once that was pretty astonishing. It takes Hazel a while to get into it, where she's starting to make contact from the other side. And when she does, it can be startling. She told me, okay, I'm getting some person with the letter J, and he's pointing at his head. And then she said, well, does this make any sense? There's two of them, J. They're pointing at their heads. And I said, wow, because one of them was my cousin, who I mentioned, John, and we had a friend, a writer, science fiction writer friend, Jay, who had died. Both of them died of brain cancer within the past 12 months when I had that reading. So, that was pretty startling that she was really, I mean, you can look at it two ways. Either she's pulling this out of my mind somehow, or she's connecting with the other side, with the dead. Either way, it's pretty interesting.
Oh my goodness, that's just amazing. And it has me thinking, what changes have the both of you found that have taken place with the paranormal phenomenon, since, like 2005 to today,
Yeah, the statistics are really interesting. I think it was 2005 that Chapman.
No, it was Baylor University.
Yeah, it was Baylor who originally did it. They concluded, it was a study that Baylor University did. They concluded that just 15% of Americans believed in the paranormal. And yet in 2017, yeah. Chapman University conducted a survey of American fears that included a battery of items, on paranormal beliefs. And what they found was that 55% of the study concludes 75% of Americans believe in some facet of the paranormal. And I think part of this is due to, social media, also to television. I mean, to movies.
Yeah, that's a big jump from 15 to 75. But, it could also be how the surveys were conducted, too, had an effect in it. And who the people surveyed were, but still... It's
impressive.
It's impressive.
And also we found over the period of that time, and actually since 2000, that people are becoming more and more willing to talk about this stuff, their own experiences.
When Trish and I first met, we both had an interest in the paranormal, but neither one of us had friends or people around us that had any interest at all. And they just thought it was weird. And so when we met, we had something in common.
Yeah, a big thing in common.
Oh, now that's a really sweet story.
I'd actually been reading books by Jane Roberts, these Seth books, and
we didn't know anybody else who'd ever. Well, I knew one person, another writer.
Yeah, and I didn't know anybody who had read those books or had any interest. And there's channeled material from an entity called Seth, and those books were coming out in the early 60s, one after another. Mid 60s?
No, 70s.
70s. Okay.
And 80s.
All right, 70s maybe.
Yeah. In the 60s is when she started doing her stuff.
Right.
Well, the work that you've done has made a profound impact, definitely on people being able to be more open to talk about psychic and spiritual phenomena. And when we look at just, how that's developed over time, I mean, to date, it seems like, if you ask somebody, hey, do you know about Seth? There are a lot of people that do. It's not like
that's true.
A closet discussion,
We have one story in our book. We have a chapter on out-of-body experiences, and there's a very interesting section on a man who was a police officer who's had out-of-body experiences all his life, never had anybody to talk to about it because, if he starts to talk to his fellow officers about at night traveling out of body, he might get in trouble, and lose his job even. So he kept quiet about it. But finally, it's probably 5, 6, 7 years ago that he started writing about it under a pseudonym and putting stuff on the internet. And then he contacted me. I'm not sure why at one point, just found something that I had written. So we started communicating, and I got him to stop using pseudonym, come out as who he is and tell his story. And, and last week we had him on our own podcast, The Mystical Underground. And the first time he'd ever spoken to about it, in any forum like that. So that was interesting. He's still working. He's not a police officer, but he's the top security person at a hospital in Central Texas. So,
and not exactly a place you'd think where somebody can talk a lot about OBEs.
But he says he just doesn't care anymore. He's just laying it out.
Yeah, I mean, if you have these experiences, and fear is really the biggest inhibitor, I think.
Yeah.
Fear, and also not just your personal fear, but also fear of ridicule.
Yeah, that's the two types of fear: fear of ridicule from other people, and the fear of what you're contacting as well. That's another factor, often based in people's religious background.
Well, you bring up a really good point. And, while there's fear of people like, hey, what are, my coworkers or my family going to think when I tell them that I'm seeing angels or spirits or, making these types of connections, how do they discern, if they're talking to something that they should be talking to, or maybe something they don't want to be playing with?
Well, I think sometimes people just they just keep it to themselves, and they probably initially, especially if you follow a traditional religion, they initially are frightened.
Tell the story about the Colombian woman.
Oh, yeah. This Colombian friend of mine, Lainey, when she was probably 3 or 4 and living in Colombia with her parents, she woke up one night and saw her grandmother at the foot of the bed. And, kids are really open, at least most kids. And she just started talking to her, even though the grandmother had been dead for a while. And she wasn't afraid. She was just startled. And Lainey's big mistake was telling her parents, who were strict Catholics, that her abuelita had been visiting her, the grandmother. So they hired a priest to perform an exorcism on their house. And then and on the girl. Yeah, and on Lainey. Lainey herself and also her bedroom. Now, today, she's in her early 40s. She has 2 kids. She's married to an American guy who's a skeptic. And, she doesn't make any excuses she still has these experiences, and she talks about them.
But her family upbringing was one where it was really frowned upon, and they felt that it was some kind of demon that was contacting her, not the grandmother. So it's
So the cultural and religious background really
have an effect.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I look back and just think about my growing up and being able to see different things. Yeah. That was a no-go. They wanted no part of that.
And it's all how you, too. I mean, other people can say it's a demon, but if you're in contact with this entity from the other side that you think is a guide or helpful, that's another matter. But we know somebody who is very open, does a lot of out of body traveling, and has she's somebody who Susan, who is spends 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon just in this trance state. I mean, she's been doing this for years. She's a retired veterinarian. She retired when she was quite young, in her 40s, and she has opened the door, and she has something that is very negative, non-human entity that is just attacking her, and she's fighting it off. And it's like a story from a movie. I mean, we get updates from her, and she's writing a book. Yeah, she's writing a book. We're helping her with the editing and guiding her on it, and it's quite a story. So
that sounds like quite an experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how were your parents toward you? I mean,
yeah, they were totally not open to the idea. Not at all, because of growing up Catholic. I mean, the only people that could see angels or spirits have to be priests or nuns. So in that whole thing, they were just like, nope, you're lying. Go ahead and don't talk about that anymore. And so, but it's interesting because you hear a lot of people that go through this similar kind of pushback. And that's why I loved your book so much, because I think a lot of times, I'm sure this is why so many people love your books, is because there's a lot that people can resonate with right there.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, there is. And also, I mean, we're heavy on stories, but we figure that stories are part of how you make your point. That people do experience this, and people from all different walks of life.
Yeah. I also want to mention that in my upbringing, I was very fortunate. My mother was Catholic and brought me up as Catholic, but she was not like that. As you mentioned with our friend in Laney, Columbia, and your experiences, she was psychic herself. When my father was not a Catholic, not religious, but he was very open to spirits, ghosts, and anything unusual. The unknown, mysteries of the unknown fascinated him. And I grew up thinking that, of course, everybody's interested in this. But then I found out it's not true at all.
Well, you know what? And that really explains a lot, having that kind of support, in your upbringing, why you guys have such a drive to find out information about this type of topic.
Well, my fascination with this really did start when I was a kid, but I didn't really know what it was. So I didn't really talk to my parents about it or anybody. And then when I got to college, I ran across, I discovered Carl Jung. And that really made the difference for me, because Jung had all sorts of mystical experiences.
But your parents weren't very open to
No, they weren't, but they weren't critical.
Yeah.
My dad was actually toward the end. He was curious. Yeah. But my mother, I remember one day, had found something I'd written about what my beliefs were, and I just pulled into a grocery store parking lot, and she didn't feel like going in. So I said, "Oh, okay." So I come back out, and she's found this notebook on the floor, and she looked at me. She goes, "I just read through this. Is this what you really believe?" I thought, "Yep." You learn to shut up. So
my mother.
That is true.
After my father died, she got message. She was in contact with him in kind of symbolic ways. He used to sit in the den in this one particular chair by a window, and it was winter, and she was sitting in his chair after he was passed on, and she noticed the frost on the window. In that frost, it looked like letters, and it spelled M-A-C, Mac, and that was his nickname. That's what people called him, Mac. And so that to her was a symbol, a sign that he was around. And then another time she was downstairs doing the laundry, and she saw this globe of light moving towards her, and then it vanished. And she just felt that was him. And then she had an experience of seeing him fully physical. She was sitting in that chair kind of slumbering and just waking up, and there he was standing in the doorway, and she looked at him, and he had this orange stripe or some strange shirt on, and she said, "Where did you get that shirt from?" He smiled and disappeared.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That is amazing. Well, it blows me away. I mean, in today's day and age, we have so many people having experiences. I mean, your book is just filled of stories, yet science is like, they're just having a hard time, catching up with everybody.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's part of the problem, although the science part of it seems to be changing. I mean, you do have some really visionary scientists now who are looking into this.
That are on the frontiers.
Like Rupert Sheldrake, the biologist, Dean Radin. People like that who are curious.
Bernard
Bateman.
Yeah. Bernard Bateman is somebody who is kind of picked up from Jung on synchronicity, and he's
really the only psychiatrist who's undertaking a serious study of it.
Yeah, he's at the University of Virginia, and he also has a radio show or a blog.
He has a radio show.
Podcast that we've been on. So
So that's good. The more people like that who start studying phenomena, the better it is for everybody else.
Now, do you have scientists that reach out to you and say, hey, you guys you're like the who's who in this arena, we'd like to have you share some of your insights with us?
Well, Bernard, we connected with him pretty early on. I can't remember how now, but he's very open, but not anybody else really. I mean, we don't know any academics.
Well, we did contact Rupert Sheldrake, and he was nice, but he wouldn't give us a blurb on our books because some people in the academic world, they
are hesitant
about dealing with people like us who are not in the academic world, and so there's some of that too. But it gives it more freedom, though, I think.
Yeah. I mean, my goodness, I mean, you touch on just like everything in your book. And one of the things that I found kind of interesting, you don't hear a whole lot of talk about this, is the remote viewing. And so how do you guys feel about that and how it just plays a part in this phenomena?
Well, remote viewing is the same as clairvoyance, being able to see at a distance, and it's been something that's people have experienced and written about and talked about for centuries. But in the past, I would say, 30, 40 years, it's taken on a new form or a new perspective because the military got involved with it, the Army and the CIA in the, I think, late 70s. It's
for Stargate.
Yeah, for Stargate program. And they used it, they got interested in it because they found out the Russians were exploring psychic abilities. So they felt that they had to catch up and see what's going on. So this program was created. It had a number of names, but the most well-known name is the Stargate program. And they spied on the Russians psychically. And
they also did a lot of other things though, like Joe remote viewed Mars 1 million years in the past.
Yeah,
I mean, that's pretty.
For NASA, we're talking about Joe McMoneagle, who is considered number 001
remote viewer.
He was with the program from the beginning and stayed right to the end. And we've known him and his wife Nancy McMoneagle, who is the director of the
Monroe
Institute in Virginia, which studies out-of-body phenomena. And so that's
but we ended up in Eleuthera on a short vacation with the McMoneagles, and back when this was, I didn't have an iPhone. I just had what was it? BlackBerry. I knew it was a berry. But I was trying to keep track of the weather because I knew that there was a hurricane system or some type of seething system out there, and I wanted to know if it was going to hit Eleuthera. So I said, guys, we have to go down to the library so I can use the internet to see what the weather is. And Joe kept saying, oh, this is not going to hit us, Trish. I said, well, let's go to the library and see what the real forecast is. So we went down there, and I was looking at this. At that time, I knew quite a bit about hurricanes because I'd researched it for one of my novels. And there were some indicators to me anyway.
Plus we live in South Florida.
Yeah, plus we live in South Florida. There were a couple of indicators that said, yeah, this is going to hit Eleuthera. And Joe, despite how psychic he is, since he wasn't really specifically tuned in on this system, he said, no, it's not going to hit us. I said, yeah, I think it is. I think we better go get some supplies. So we went to this little store and picked up, some canned goods and food and paper towels. And I remember Nancy saying to me, why do we need paper towels? And I said, okay, here's the deal. We are probably not going to have water if it hits here. We're not going to have this. We're not going to have that. Sure enough, this system hit us. It was only a Category 1, but
with a lot of rain, though.
With a lot of rain.
Yeah, we got trapped on this island. On the end of the island, the only road out was flooded to 6 feet deep, and cars could not get in or
couldn't
out.
flush the toilets, and so Rob and Joe had to go down to the ocean to get water to flush the toilets.
Down, and there are huge waves.
Oh, wow.
Bucket, and suddenly a wave washes completely over us, and we get a half a bucket of water out of it. And,
oh my goodness.
Imagine that.
Plus we lost power for 5 days. Yeah. I mean, it was not a vacation.
We were basically trapped there. And, Joe, for all of his psychic abilities, he was using his logical mind over his psychic mind. There's a term that the remote viewers use. It's something overlay. I can't think of the term right now, but it's when the rational mind takes over to a logical mind to analyze something rather than the psychic abilities.
And yet Joe has done some incredible work, especially finding lost people in Japan.
Oh yeah,
he's
incredible stuff when he's tuned in. But he's not always tuned in, obviously. We were trapped on that island for quite a while, and finally this huge truck was able to get in, where you had to climb up a ladder in order to get into the cab. I mean, it was so big. It was able to make it through the water and get us out of there
to the airport.
Yeah, to the airport.
Oh my gosh! You guys are adventurers. My goodness.
Yeah, that's the kind of adventure you want, really. You just want to go someplace and have some fun,
Well, I mean, here we talk about, adventure out of body or, on the other side. And you guys just went for the straight adventure on land.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'm glad that you were safe through all that. It's interesting with remote viewing. I mean, that is just a very interesting topic and how it's being used, And then also, I know your book talks about telepathy, and I'd love for you to share about that for our listeners.
Yeah, we happen to live next door to a woman who's one of identical twins, and for a while, her twin and her family was living with Annette. And so I said, "Hey, you guys, what? You're identical twins. Scientists recognize that you guys have all kinds of telepathic experiences. So give me an example." So her sister, Jeanette, is one who was living with Annette, says, "Oh, you wouldn't believe how many adventures we've had with telepathy." So they told me that some years ago when Jeanette was a representative for Chanel, and she was living, I think, in Tennessee, and Annette was living somewhere else. So one night, Jeanette and her boyfriend heard this tremendous crash in the bathroom. And Jeanette they both bolted awake, and she said, "Somebody's in there. Somebody's broken into the house." So the boyfriend goes and gets a bat, and they both sneak into the bathroom, and there's nobody there, but all the Chanel bottles are on the floor broken. And right then, Jeanette says she really felt that something had happened to her, to Annette, her twin. Sure enough, within minutes, her phone rings, and it's Annette, and she's sobbing. And she is calling she was making a night deposit, and somebody held her at gunpoint, and she thought she was going to be shot. And anyway, the guy ended up running off or something. She wasn't hurt. But that's an example of where, Jeanette felt it. She knew her sister was in danger. That's just one of those experiences they've had, a whole bunch.
Oh my goodness. I mean, that is so intense having to go through that, but the feeling that the twin that's not having that experience, what they're feeling, just knowing that something's happening.
Recently, Jeanette, the twin who picked up on the Chanel lady, she's no longer a Chanel, but she works down here as at some type of dermatologist clinic. But anyway, she recently had back surgery. And I asked Annette, I said, okay, so when your twin was in surgery, did you go through whatever she was going through? And Annette said, no, she didn't. She goes, it doesn't always work in that way. It seems to work for them when one or the other is in danger.
But Trish and I have these telepathic experiences all the time. We just kind of take them for granted, and it's not really necessarily in situations of danger for us. For example, last night I had just decided that I would contact this man who has the Mitchell Hedges crystal skull. He's the caretaker of it, Bill Holman, to come on our podcast. And just as I started to go to Messenger, Trish says, "Have you contacted Bill Holman yet?" I said, "I'm doing it right now." We hadn't been talking about that either.
I think part of that is if you're married a long time, you kind of pick up on each other's cues too.
Well, it could be a little bit of both, right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, and it's just interesting how that happens, just knowing how the other person's doing, because it's almost like your spirit comes in tune with another spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Well, also the connection telepathically between parent and child is pretty strong, I think. There have been times when I just knew that Megan was upset about something, and I would call her and she'd say, "Oh, this happened or that happened." You feel it.
Yeah, for sure. You're able to make that connection. And gosh, we're covering everything here, so I might as well ask this question too. How about people that actually, and we kind of talked about this a little bit about being able to hear and see things, but when people see things, what's that like? And I'd love for you to give an example for our listeners.
I'll give you an example. One time, since my parents died, my mother died in 2000. My dad passed in 2005. And he had Parkinson's and she had Alzheimer's. So over the years, I tried to keep track of their progress in the afterlife through dreams. And sometimes I would be successful and sometimes not. But one night, Rob was teaching meditation at a gym. And he did this eyes half open meditation. And you were supposed to see what you could see what came up. So in the corner of the room, I suddenly saw my mother, and she looked like maybe 35, 40, much younger. She was 84 when she died. And she was happy, and she was directing all these people into what looked like some sort of theater. I thought, wow, this is really cool. But she can walk. She's cognizant. She's happy. And then she waved. And my dad comes sprinting into the picture, gives her a hug, and then they both seem to realize that I could see them, and they disappeared. But that's the last time I've had any real definite confirmation that they're in the afterlife and things are fine.
Oh, what a beautiful confirmation, though. You got to love that.
Oh, yeah. I was really moved,
Yeah, I had these meditation workshops I've taught over the last 10, 12 years. Had some unusual experiences. It all depends on the people, of course, and their interest in this kind of phenomenon, because I push it towards the end with spirit contact as a possibility in meditation. And some people, don't go for that, and I give them other options that they can do with the meditation. But I remember one particular woman's talking about how she was in contact with her brother who had died. It was the first he had died over a year ago, and she had no contact at all. And suddenly, and she was so happy that she'd taken this meditation course because she had finally come into contact with him. It was just verification for him. What he said, he smiled and said that he's okay, and went off on his own. And that's usually the common message when spirit contact is with lost loved ones that have died recently, is they're coming back just basically to tell you that they're okay.
Although we had a really strange experience in 2015, I think it was, Whitley Strieber's wife, Anne, passed away. And I had found out about it the next day. So as I was writing him an email saying how sorry I was, I started to write. What I wanted to write was, if you need anything, please let us know. And at the moment I wrote that, there's a tremendous explosion in our family room, which is right off our offices. And it was so loud, our dog leaped up off the couch, and Rob and I both shot to our feet thinking maybe a transformer had blown, or the TV or the stove or something.
Something had happened because it was so loud, but nothing. There was no sign of anything out of the order, except for that explosion had been very loud. And
so I wrote Whitley, and I said, I finished my email telling him what had just happened, and he says, "That's Anne. She's talking to you," or something to that effect.
She's back.
She's back. Yeah. But it was
my goodness,
weird, And I think sometimes that is how spirits communicate through sounds too.
Yeah, we had experience in the Dominican Republic that way too, with sound and spirits. We had gotten this hotel. We signed up for a room in this hotel that was right on the beach. It looked really nice, and
on the internet.
Yeah, I found it on the internet. But then when we arrived there, the court, it was like the building was like 3 buildings, the back and the 2 sides faced the ocean with this courtyard in the center. But the courtyard wasn't a normal courtyard; it was a graveyard. It was a cemetery, and so our room was right on the cemetery.
Wow.
Yeah, it's strange.
And so one day the gate to the cemetery was open, so Trish and I walked in, and we thought this was like a historic cemetery or something, but there within 5 feet of the gate this was a windsurfing vacation we went on. My daughter and I are windsurfers.
I shop.
Yeah, and so there was a grave from somebody who had died 4 months earlier. It was a windsurfer, and the top half of his board had been cut off, and that was the grave marker. And so that was odd. And then a grave digger walked up to us who had been digging a grave, and he wanted to show us something. So what he wanted to show us was that he was digging for a burial, but he had come upon a coffin that was down lower. He said, because the sand from here just keeps coming in from the ocean, and the graveyard rises, so there's like levels of the graveyard. So we decided now we didn't really want to see that. So I just happened to bend over and picked up a rock, and we left. And by this time, our daughter was, said, I don't want to be staring at this graveyard. She was about 12 years old at the time, 12 or 13. She said, I don't want to be staring at this graveyard. Can't we move somewhere?
So we did.
Yeah, we talked to the management, and they got us an apartment on the side, which was closer to the ocean. So now our porch, instead of facing the graveyard, faced the ocean. However, the door to the apartment was actually closer to the graveyard than before. But anyhow, so that night, our first night there, we go to bed kind of early, 10:30, 11. Megan is already asleep in the back of the apartment. And we go to sleep, and probably maybe sleeping, and falling asleep maybe less than half an hour when I heard this boom, 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 3 times, like a wrecking ball hitting the side of the building. There's a pause, and then again, boom, boom, boom. 3 times we heard the 3 sounds. And after the 3rd time, I couldn't tell whether, is this happening or am I dreaming? And I sat up. Trish simultaneously sits up. She has heard the same sound. And it was a feel, but it was exhilarating. It was exhilarating. I mean, we both felt very elevated from this experience. It wasn't scary at all. And then the television came on. We hadn't even been watching television. So that was contact through sound, and it was very positive.
But it's because Rob picked up that rock.
Maybe.
I think it was. And so the next day he went and put the rock back in the cemetery. I think it was that windsurfer.
Everything calmed down after that.
Yeah.
I picked that up near the windsurfer's grave, actually.
So the next day I went down and asked the manager, I said, do you have ghosts? He goes, oh, yeah, they're all friendly. I thought, okay.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, but it's true, though. I mean, you know, spirits can attach to different things. So, you know, if you're getting that kind of reaction, most people would never even think, maybe I need to go put the rock back. You know?
That was the first thing we thought of, because as soon as Rob picked up that rock, I thought, uh-oh, I don't know that we should do that.
Oh, boy. Well, so when we talk about, you know, psychic phenomena and all that, how does our emotions come into play, you know, when we talk about like visions? I mean, is that a factor?
I think emotions are always a factor. You know, I mean, trying to think of a specific example. Well, I'll give you an example. One day we were at the dog park, and this woman came in with her dog, and I knew she had just lost her husband. So I asked her, I said, I always ask people this, has he been around? Have you had any contact? And she said, actually, yeah. And she said, it's been so comforting, you know, especially after you lose a spouse or a child or whatever. I think that kind of contact is comforting, really deeply comforting. So, and the only reason she was able to kind of wrap her head around whatever it was, there were a couple of different experiences she had, but it's because she emotionally, she really needed to know.
I think that's an important factor. Sometimes, you know, I just gave that one from the Dominican Republic where we're really energized by that contact, but we also had an experience where it was just the opposite, where we were scared out of our wits with contact. And that was at this community, the spiritualist community called Costa Vega. They have an old hotel built in the early 1920s, a Mediterranean-style hotel. And one time we were the only ones in the hotel. It was, I think, March.
It's April, during Bike Week.
Yeah.
In Daytona.
So that's a big thing where everybody who was traveling around Central Florida was going to Bike Week, and Costa Vega was empty. And we're the only ones staying there. We had a room, actually it was a suite in the second floor, and we were up late reading about 1 o'clock or so when suddenly we heard this clomping sound coming down the hall. We were at the
up the stairs first,
up the stairs and down the hall towards us, and heavy footsteps,
like the person's wearing boots or something.
Yeah, and just is almost thunderous coming towards us, and just this feeling of negative energy coming towards us.
And dread.
Yeah, and it stops right in front of our door.
By this time, Marianne, we had pushed the dresser in front of the door. What a stupid reaction, you know?
I can imagine.
Yeah, we pushed the dresser in front of the door because, you know, whatever it was, I don't think was human, and there was no way I was going to open that door to see what it was.
And even then, it rattled the doorknob.
Yeah, the doorknob rattled, and our daughter was like 1 year old at the time and was sleeping, and Trish scooped her up.
I was looking for an exit down the fire escape.
Oh my gosh!
That's the only time we've had a frightening experience like that, I think.
And so, you know, it's not because we were, you know, naturally afraid of spooks, you know. That wasn't it at all. But whatever it was not a friendly visitor.
Well, and you get this sense if it is or it isn't, you know?
Right.
So, I mean, you can get a sense of like, oh, this is a family member visiting and they're having fun and playing. And then another sense is like, we need to look for a fire escape or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also how emotion enters into things. I mean, when you have an experience, you can feel its importance.
Yeah, you really can. You can feel what it is, you know?
Yeah, you can definitely feel whether it's good or bad, or good, you know, positive or negative. I don't want to say bad, but.
Well, yeah, I understand what you mean, though, because they talk about light and dark or what have you. And so from a soul level, you get this sense of like, is this where I should be? Or,
Right.
you get this sense of like, gosh, I need to get out of here.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Well, and so you talk about creativity also, and I was very intrigued by this. So how does this play a part in all this?
So many things have happened in terms of the creative stuff that sometimes I think that, especially if you write fiction, when you're really tuned into your story, you may end up tapping into the future. It may not be something that you want to do, but it happens. And for instance, if you look at science fiction, some of the science fiction writers have really tuned into the future. Like take Jules Verne. Okay, he did his 1870 novel, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Okay, he imagined an underwater ship powered by electricity. In 1888, this guy was an American inventor, Simon Lake. He was inspired by Verne's novel, and he invented his own submarine, the Argonaut, based on what Verne had written. But there are a lot of examples with science fiction, like Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. He describes little seashells like thimble radios that are portable. Portable headphones already existed, but they were massive and heavy. So Bradbury's thimble radio from 1953 book really looked like earbuds. That's another example.
Yeah. There's also examples
That's
of
really interesting.
Novelists who have tuned into events as well. The Titanic was one event that was written about by an author.
Can't remember his name.
Yeah, who this was like 14 years earlier, and the name of the ship was the Titan, and very similar name, and it also was in the North Atlantic and hit icebergs, and it was just the description of the size was very similar to the Titanic, and it's just eerie. That story. I know his last name is Robertson. I can't think of his first name. And the story is about the Titan, and I think that's the title. And so that's something he seemed to have tuned into that event.
He had remarkable similarities, like a list of 20 different things.
Even the number of boats, lifeboats, were not enough for all the people aboard. And of course, that was the same with the Titanic.
Another example would be Philip K. Dick, who was a prolific short story writer. And the Minority Report was based on one of his stories. Okay, that came out in, I can't remember, I think 1990? Minority Report, somewhere in the 1990s. And one of the things that they did in the movie was this universal touchscreen technology, which didn't exist at the time. But in 2013, researchers at the University of Bristol announced they had developed something called ultra-haptic technology, which allows for the touchscreen without touching, just like in the movie. In the movie, they just pass their hands over the screen without touching it. So there's something else,
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the most stunning ones happened in 1972 when Regency Press published a novel called Black Abductor. And it's about a terrorist group led by a black guy who kidnapped a college student, Patricia. Her wealthy father was well known and had right-wing sympathies. Now, this refers to the Patricia Hearst kidnapping.
Which didn't take place.
Yeah, which didn't take place until 2 years later. But here are the things that were similar. Okay, in the novel, Patricia was kidnapped near the campus, while she was with her boyfriend and was badly beaten by the abductors. The boyfriend was. For a while, he was even a suspect in the case. Okay, the fictional Patricia initially resisted her captors, but eventually subscribed to their ideology and became a champion of their cause. Okay, the terrorists sent Polaroid photos to her father and described the abduction as America's first political kidnapping. The terrorists predicted they eventually would be surrounded by police, tear gassed, and wiped out. 2 years after the book was published in 1974, Patricia Hearst, daughter of a newspaper baron, Randolph Hearst, and then a college student, was abducted from her apartment near campus. The kidnappers were a member of the Symbionese Liberation Army, and it was a terrorist group led by a black guy. Her boyfriend, Stephen Weed, was with her at the time, was badly beaten, and became a suspect in the case. Patricia Hearst, like the fictional Patricia, became a sympathizer of abductors' cause, and she ended up robbing a bank with her kidnappers and was photographed carrying an MI carbine. All right, either the FBI was either familiar with the novel or they had read it, because the author became a suspect in the case. And the real life abductors, were eventually surrounded by the cops, tear-gassed, and killed, just like the fictional kidnappers had predicted they would be. So, okay, my question with all this was, had the terrorists read the novel? Or was this just an instance where a creative edge enabled an author to sense the future so deeply that he uncovered these really stunning and eerie details?
Yeah, I just don't think that this group would read this book.
I don't either. I don't think. Let's go do that.
Let's find somebody named Patricia. Let's, try to reassemble this novel. They weren't.
So so it was really, the author really tuned in on something.
It's like Edgar Allan Poe did in his novel.
It was an unfinished novel.
Yeah, an unfinished novel called The
Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym.
Yeah, that was it, right. So he wrote in this novel a story about a shipwreck. There are 4 survivors on the lifeboat, and after days of being out at sea, they're out of supplies, and they decide that they're going to eat one of the survivors, and the one they go after is Richard Parker, who's a kid who's a cabin boy, the youngest, I think 17 or 18 years old.
It was his first voyage.
At sea. And so they draw straw. The way they did it is they drew straws, and he got the short one. So they immediately stabbed him and killed him, and
survived on his body.
So 47 years later, a very similar thing happens where a ship goes down, 4 people survive, and there's a cabin boy, and his name is Richard Parker. Same name,
and he was eaten.
And they had even talked about drawing straws to pick out the one to be eaten, but Richard Parker, the kid, had been drinking seawater, so he was delirious, and so they just killed him and ate him. And then they were rescued, oddly enough, by a ship called the Montezuma, which is
the cannibal king of the Aztecs.
Cannibal king of the Aztecs. So it's synchronicity and precognition and all kinds of.
So Poe really tuned in on something.
Even the name, and that's a dramatic one, and that story became known as the best coincidence ever in a contest in London, and it was entered by the
Arthur Kessler was the one.
Arthur Kessler was the one who organized it.
Yeah,
he'd written a book about coincidence, and the kid who entered the story was actually related to.
He was a cousin,
but not a cousin, because this was years later. But it related to the original Richard Parker, and so that he entered it, and that was considered the best coincidence ever.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing that happens. Really horrific.
Yeah.
Too. I mean, you look at these events that happen, you wonder if it's the same souls that are going through these, like replaying these same events almost.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do wonder about that, sometimes when you have these, I wonder if it's a soul thing. It's sure.
I'm very curious.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I think I have time for one more question. I could talk with you guys all day long.
This is so much fun.
So much great information. I know. We always have such a great time. My goodness. Well, and
So there's this thing called planetary empath. What is that, and how does that relate to us?
Planetary empath.
Yeah. I think it was around 2010. we started getting email from people about physical symptoms that they were experiencing either hours or days and sometimes weeks before some type of catastrophe. It might be natural, it could be, a terrorist attack. And the symptoms were almost universal. These people were not otherwise sick, but they would get high fever, they'd have nosebleeds, they'd have heart palpitations. What else? What were some of the other ones? There's just a whole list of, and they're always physical symptoms. And
a lot of problems with the hearing.
Yeah, hearing, the nose. Yeah. It's almost like the body becomes a receptor for the planet. And after the attack or catastrophe, whatever it is that they've been picking up on, is over, the symptoms disappear.
But the problem with these planetary empaths is they know something's coming, but they can't pinpoint it, and they don't know quite the nature of it, whether it's a natural event,
whether it's volcanic or earthquake,
or a major terrorist attack. They know something is coming, so it's frustrating, and they're not happy campers either, because they don't like these situations, but they seem to be tuning in. And we tried to collect these stories and keep track of this to see if there was some way that we could somehow pinpoint when the next event of this nature would be happening. But we could pinpoint that something was happening,
going to happen.
And we did that with the Paris terrorist attack. We didn't know where it was, though, or that it was a terrorist attack, but we knew that something was coming very shortly, and within, I don't know, it was either 24 hours or 48 hours that attack happened. And the woman who we were in contact with, as soon as it happened, all the symptoms disappeared.
And some of them, like if they get, say, flushed cheeks, that's one of the things, at least in this one empath, that indicated it was going to be volcanic. But it's never specific, except for, how they decipher their own symptoms. Like one woman, maybe she felt heart palpitations, so she knew that was going to be an earthquake. In other words, it was very personal to each one.
Yeah, and there's one woman who lives in Wales has given us a number of these, but she really doesn't like it. She says, I'm retiring from being a planetary empath. I am not going to pick up, she just programmed herself for not do it anymore, not pick it up. It's just so frustrating. It wasn't helpful, but it was, painful. And so she said, that's not a higher path to follow.
It's got to be tough when you have those kind of, reactions to, when things are happening. I would think that would be really difficult to just have.
Yeah, I mean, one of these women, Deborah, lived in California, and in 2004, before that horrible earthquake tsunami that melted Fukushima, I think that was 2004. Anyway, she and her husband were in a grocery store, and she suddenly felt complete upheaval from the floor up, and she was so unsteady. She pitched forward, and her husband grabbed her. I said she barely made it out to the car, but what she saw was just total destruction and this, the chaos of the tsunami. But she didn't know where it was or where it was going to be. And this happened about 3 days before that awful thing.
Yeah, it was like 36,000 people were killed in the tsunami.
Oh, I think it was more.
Wow. That's just really tough. I mean, to be so connected to these kind of events.
And to not know, exactly where it is or what you could do to help.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be, if I had some kind of psychicness in that regard, I think that would be the hardest thing for me, is knowing that you're having this, but it's not like you're able to. Yeah, you can't warn people. You can't help. I would have a hard time with that.
Yeah, and even if you could warn people, who would listen?
Yeah, even if you could, that's what we've talked about. Even if you could pinpoint the location and the nature of it, what would you tell the police, and what would they do?
You might end up in a padded cell.
What could you might become a suspect if it was a terrorist attack.
Either that, or you'd start working for the government, right?
Yeah, right.
Oh my goodness. Well, gosh, Trish and Rob, I mean, we could talk forever. I just love whenever we get together and have discussions about your new book. Where can our listeners connect with both of you and learn more about your work and be part of your community?
Probably blog.synchrosecrets.com. That's where we post regularly. But for our nonfiction books, also go to phenomena111.com. That gives some information about the books.
And plus, we have a new
the Mystical Underground
podcast that we started a couple months ago called the Mystical Underground. We are doing that once a week now.
Oh my God, that's so awesome! I'm going to have to listen to all of them.
I'll send you links, Marianne.
Yeah, we got some.
Yeah. I want to check this out and listen to it. And gosh, I mean, you guys do such an amazing job. I mean, I highly suggest everyone go and check that out as well. Well, Rob and Trish, thank you both so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, thank you for having us. It's always fun talking with you.
Thank you, Marianne.
It has been such an honor to spend this time with you, Trish and Rob. My goodness, you guys are so amazing. I love the work that you're doing and can't wait to see what you do next. If you'd like to pick up a copy of any of Trish and Rob's books, you can at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and any indie retailer. If it's not on the shelf, ask for them to order it. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just what moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Friday and Saturday at 5 p.m. Pacific and 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.